Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cheyenne Hills Podcast, Verse by Verse. We know it's often hard to find time to spend studying God's Word, so we're happy you can join us as we read, unpack, and discuss Scripture every Tuesday and Thursday. We hope you enjoy the program.
Across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Well, welcome. We're glad to be back after a slight break. We had some technical difficulties and people unable to produce at the time, so we're glad we have Casey back and we're back on the air. And glad to welcome René into the studio. Galen isn't able to be here, so it's just René and I today.
Yeah, hi, Ken. I'm good. Good to be here.
I'm glad to have you here and working through this with me, and hopefully we can give a few insights into Genesis to our audience. So we're going to start here at Genesis chapter 29 with verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the sons of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field. And behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it. For from that well they watered the flocks. Now the stone of the mouth of the well was large. And when all the flocks were gathered there, they would then roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. And Jacob said to them, My brothers, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. And he said to them, Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And they said to him, Is it well with him? He said to them, Is it well with him? And they said, It is well. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. And he said, Behold, it's still high day. It's not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, We cannot until all the flocks are gathered, and they roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. And while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came about that when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. So it's kind of introductory here as he has left come from the Palestine area and is now up in northeast of that, which would be the Haran area, and the encounter with Rachel. And it's just kind of an interesting thing. Any observations at this point? It's not a intense passage, but what do you have?
I just think it's really interesting that how God works behind the scenes. Sometimes in our own lives, to this looks like just a regular, something that would happen here in Laramie County. We see where the cattle are located, and it's, especially with the hot weather we've had, they're going to be around the tanks and the windmills. And so this is what Jacob has done. He's just happens to be at this area where all this, the livestock is gathered, but there's more meaning behind that. God is setting him up to meet his relatives and his future wife. And so I don't know, I think it's just encouraging how God can kind of just orchestrate what would seem as benign events all to work for his glory and his purposes.
Yeah, good observation. Just another couple of things. One is with the laziness of the other shepherds there. I mean, it's like, we're just sitting there waiting. And he gets up and by himself moves the stone. It's like, you guys couldn't have done that. But, apparently just the laziness. But another observation is when I read this last night and was just thinking about it, the emotion behind Jacob's whole encounter of having to leave, maybe flee for his life, and he has that encounter with God at Bethel, and he gets here, but the fact that he goes up and he kisses Rachel and then he weeps, that must have been a lot of buried emotion, and then suddenly it's like, okay, here's people that I can trust, hopefully, and it just the emotional well breaks, and he he weeps, which that word kind of struck me as odd initially, but it's like,
Yeah, he was full of emotion, whether relief or whether he was, again, probably overjoyed because he finally had found his new home, maybe. And yeah, I like that Jacob just seems to be proactive. Like, you guys can wait around, but I'm getting business done here. And just the fact that he recognized his cousin, again, they had to kind of feel each other out. I mean, they didn't have Facebook back then. They didn't have Google. They didn't know who, they didn't have family pictures that they swapped back and forth. So it was really important for him to search out and find his family.
yeah. So it has kind of a refuge here, and so maybe that's why he has such an emotional response. So
Yeah.
okay, well, going on with verse 13. And it came about that when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he related to Laban all of these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and face. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. So any questions that arise in this passage? I mean, I have one. It's her eyes were weak, and it's like, what was going on with that poor girl? Some kind of optical blemish. I was going to say deformity, but it probably wasn't a deformity. I mean, I doubt she was cross-eyed. I hope
Yeah,
not.
I thought the same thing. My version says there was no sparkle in her eyes, and I thought, to me, sparkle might be that, whether she was shy or she wasn't confident. I mean, there was something that, there was no sparkle in her eye, and that caused Jacob probably to look more towards Rachel, even though he had already met Rachel. I mean, he might have felt that he wanted to marry her right from when he met her early on in the past passage. But yeah, no sparkle in her eye. Yeah.
But anyway, so the setup now, it's like, hey, he goes to the dad, and it's like, I want to serve 7 years for that woman there, and so it's like, okay, it's like kind of a romantic, romance in the story there, but the plot soon turns.
Yes, it does.
So verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my time is complete, that I might go into her." And Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came about in evening that he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him. And Jacob went into her. And Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. And you might go, okay, was that really significant? But obviously, as the story progresses, it does become a significant little fact. And so verse 25, so it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served with you? Why then have you deceived me?" But Laban said, "It's not the practice of our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. Complete the bridal week of this one, and we will give you the other also for the service which you served with me for another 7 years." And Jacob did so and completed her week and gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. And Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and indeed he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban for another 7 years. Mm-hmm. So what happens in this paragraph?
Well, I mean, so Jacob, who had deceived his father and his brother, is now being deceived. And, every time I read through this, I think about how we reap what we sow. And if we sow deception in our life, it's going to come around at some point. And sure enough, it comes around to Jacob, and it must have felt awful. Here he had loved Rachel. He was looking forward to marrying her, and to find out it wasn't Rachel. He must have been heartbroken. And I think about Leah. I mean, she knew that her dad was going to do this, and yet she never said a word. So, obviously she was in on the deception, a willing participant, maybe. Again, knowing that culture, she knew that she, as the oldest, deserved to be married first. So, I don't really know what was in her heart at that time, but I know that she didn't speak up.
Yeah.
She didn't speak up on that night and say, "Hey, Jacob, hey, my dad made me come in here. I'm Leah." She didn't do that, and Jacob had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd never really thought of it from Leah's, perspective and culpability or responsibility there. But yeah. All right. Well, that seems like a good place for us to stop. And so we'll pick up then with verse 31 next time. But thanks for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next time.